right, welcome back to another episode of Modern Cyber. We've got another great guest lined up for today to have a conversation about the topic, really the topic of the year probably, and I think it's safe to say it's going to be the topic of 2025 as well. We are going to be talking about AI, we're going to be talking about risks, we're going to be talking about ethics, experiences, opinions, all kinds of things with today's guest, Kelvin Green. Kelvin Green is a Chief Cybersecurity Advisor who has won multiple awards, to include President's Club as a sales engineer. Along with his wife, Kelvin started CyberSec and I, which is an advisory company focused on utilizing user and entity behavioral analytics, UEBA, I'm sure you're all familiar with that acronym, and AI with the goal of helping organizations be more secure in an ever-evolving digital world. Kelvin is focused on healthcare and government. He's given in-person and remote presentations and training on behalf of multiple organizations. About 20 years of IT and cybersecurity expertise with some really interesting experiences, such as infrastructure and operations lead for the Kentucky Health Benefits Exchange, lead messaging engineer for behavioral health organization, some work with the Navy, some work in Hawaii, some work as a solutions architect for DHS, IT support for SMBs in Hawaii, and even game testing for a Tetris release. And if we have some time, I'd love to hear more about that Tetris experience. Kelvin, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today on Modern Cyber.
Yep, thank you, Jeremy.
Well, AI is the topic. AI is probably the number one thing that everybody in IT and cyber is talking about and has been talking about for the last year and a half, 2 years now. And I guess the question I'd really like to start today's conversation with is, what do you fear most about artificial intelligence?
So what do I fear most? I'll be honest with you and say meeting myself.
Okay.
At the end of the day, meeting myself. Well, you always see yourself as you, and you're always in you, meaning you're in your head. But what happens when you have a system that doesn't have your morals, your controls, and is able to mimic you, meaning it can do you, but it doesn't sleep, it doesn't rest, and it doesn't have all your same morals. That has to be a scary creature, because everything about yourself that you feel can be exposed to the world, it can do that. So yeah, the AI myself.
And so when you think about that, one thing that comes to mind is, well, that can be a scary thing, or that could be a very empowering thing. If you think about yourself in a positive light and the work that you do is, let's say, for the benefit of your customers or your organization, great. Well, now I don't have to sleep. I don't have to take time off. I don't have to take vacation. I can just keep doing the work that I do for the positive 24/7. Isn't that a good thing?
Absolutely. And that brings up one of the things that AI doesn't have. AI doesn't have morals yet. That's one of the reasons why we have to put guardrails around it. When I operate through something called the golden rule, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. As long as I'm thinking that what I do with myself is always going to be positive for the good.
Okay.
However, if you strip that away, what will happen? All your capabilities to do could be used for bad. So it's like, hey, is electricity good or bad? Because of what's used it for. Is a gun good or bad? Because of what's used it for. So your morals are right. So that's what would be my fears, because AI today doesn't have the ability to have morals. Dangerous.
Yeah. Well, and I guess kind of just thinking along those lines, if you think about an AI that's trained on you, meaning it's trained on, let's say, the documents that you've written, the emails, the correspondence that you have, to your point, it doesn't know the motivation that's in your mind for the way that you, let's say, address a certain topic or answer a certain question, or why you did a certain task. It just knows your history of doing those things. And so if there's kind of a situational change, maybe the context is lacking and there's a little bit of a lack of understanding about how your motivations might change in response. Is that kind of what you mean?
Absolutely. You hit it on the nail. Absolutely.
Interesting. And what's been kind of your experience to date with, let's say, some of the AI experimentation that you've done? I guess actually just starting from the first perspective, have you trained an AI to be Kelvin?
Absolutely not, and never intend to do so. But with that being said, in my experience so far, it's mostly just been in the realm of achieving the goal of getting high fidelity alerts. And what I mean by that is the goal is to train it with as much contextual data so that it can operate as I would as a human being. So one of the flaws that we see today in security is that we're operating without a complete picture, right? And so the goal would be to get AI to bring in all that different data to build a context so it can have a more complete picture to achieve these goals.
And I think this is one of the things, especially in the field of UEBA, where having that context is so important, right? So you always hear the example, especially in UEBA, and I'm sure a lot of our audience has spent time looking at this space or is at least familiar with the topics. You hear about these challenges with UEBA, things like, the impossible travel. Jeremy's credentials are used to log in from Virginia right now, and then 15 minutes later, they're used to log in from, I don't know, Spain. Well, like, how did that happen? The most likely answer is that Jeremy's credentials are compromised. But similarly, Jeremy logging in from Spain for the first time may not actually be bad. I might actually be there on a business trip or on vacation or something, but an AI may not have that context. And so I think that one of the things that this field has suffered from historically is a lack of contextual awareness. So how do you think about applying AI to providing contextual awareness or to minimizing alerts without that context?
Yeah, so without that context, that's where it gets more complex. Without that context, you want to give it that context. You want to say, hey, let's bring in some HR data and say, hey, we know that you're on vacation. So because we know this behavior about you, now we do know that you're overseas. And so it's okay. You're out. You're on vacation. Okay. What data you gave us. Also, how would AI help with that? Well, simply put, you mentioned that you logged in for the first time, right? You're like, great.
Yep.
But did you do unusual behavior when you logged in? What if AI was tracking and say, hey, I know how you normally use the system. I know what you normally did on this day. Are you doing something different? I mean, if you started dumping out data all of a sudden, it's going to shut off trigger too. Why? Because now you're overseas and you're dumping out data that you normally dump out. Whether you got hacked or you're doing it yourself, doesn't matter. We don't want that to happen. So is the more data in the threat chain and then having the right amount of context to, bring it all together.
Well, I guess just like as a background, when you think about training AI for UEBA, we talked about HR systems. We talked about, the activity that I performed once I logged in. What are some of the key data sources that go into training AI to deal with the flood of data? Because if I think about UEBA as everything connected to me and my account, that is so much data, right? There is just way too much. I email and I Slack and I text and I do all these things. What are the key data sources and how do you think about kind of ingesting them and then maybe filtering noise from the training data?
Yeah. So key data sources would be clearly XDR, EDR, XDR for your endpoint. Next, we want to get your network traffic. A big thing is we want to make sure that when data comes over to us from wherever it originated, that is secure. So your network would be next.
Okay.
Third, it would be authentication. We want to say, hey, is it multi-factor authentication? We want to make sure that we are understanding from, the AAA, right? We're making sure that we understand how you logged in, what you have access to, and what you did. Right? We want to track all those. Then and clear the firewall on the other end for the network. After that, it starts to go into, well, what are you doing, right? So what are you doing in the system? Clearly, if you're logging into a server, we had the XDR there, but are you logging into a database? What do you access? Because if we don't have understanding to a granular level of what you're doing, think of the black box theory. If I know what you did on the computer versus each transaction in the system, I can only tell you when something bad happened to the computer and not at the transactional level. So I would say, that's where it gets into the area of I can't give you much more than that. So I can really just say, you have your EDR, XDR, you have a SIM. You want to have a firewall. But after that, again, it depends on your business and what you're doing. What's your data? Because at the end of the day, we got to secure your data for your environment.
Yeah. And this is one of those areas that I think is particularly challenging for people because, to your point, securing your data for your environment, I need to understand a little bit about you as an organization, about how you operate. Into something you said earlier, what are the normal things that Jeremy does when he logs in? Jeremy logs in on Monday morning. First things he's going to do is check his email and go into HubSpot and look for updates on, customer pipeline or customer support tickets or whatever, right? And so you can kind of learn that context. But one of the challenges I see around this is that ultimately with the data sources that you talked about, I mean, these are massive data sets. And they're data sets that really grow with scale of the organization. And I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but it's probably a little bit non-linear growth, meaning the more systems that you add, it's not that each system adds, let's say 10% more data. I add two systems and now I've got, instead of 20% more data, I've got like 40% more data, because those systems might talk to each other and they might be integrated into other systems that I'm using. So like, what are some of the things that you've learned over time in terms of like, how do customers manage that data best? Because it could be a flood, right? It could just be way too much.
So that one, I would say, comes in two forms. One, prioritizing the data sources, and then it comes down to prioritizing the events in the data sources. Like if you capture all the network traffic, yeah, it's going to scale massively. Same thing if you had a high transaction database, scale massively. But if you said, hey, I only want to know these 10 subset of events, and there's a bit of data about it, then you would acquire a solution that would help you filter that down, and you would log that, and you would say, hey, I'm getting the information I need. So everything else, just discard it. Now, am I saying that everybody makes the right decision in terms of what they discard? Live and learn.
Yeah. Well, that's great. And I think like, the kind of thinking about almost like two layers of filtering there, right? Like I've got my initial layer of filtering on the data as it comes in raw. And I let's say like only look for certain types of events or certain types of data signals that I want to then store. And then once I've got that stream of data coming in, then I can apply the second filter, meaning like the actual detection on top of that stream and look for like a potentially bad thing. That makes a ton of sense. Coming back to AI for a second, you mentioned something at the beginning that I want to kind of come back to, and that's like AI has no morals. And one of the questions that to me comes up around that is like, what's the role of regulation, in your opinion, in kind of thinking about that problem? Should regulators like Congress, like lawmakers be stepping in to do more relative to assigning morals to AI?
Absolutely. And that's a big topic that, I love to go down to the Chamber of Commerce and interact with different organizations there and talk about this topic because, yes, right now is per industry, they're implementing their guardrails. They're saying, hey, we want to decide what we want to do. Let's go with the concept of hallucination, right? That's really dangerous. I mean, I can say, make up something. What if somebody never drove in the United States and they came over here and they said, hey, I want them to drive, and the LLM that they used had Grand Theft Auto, the game, as a data source. And they say, hey, you can drive on any side of the road. You can do whatever you want as long as the police officer doesn't see you take the car. Okay, well, let me go out and go do this. I can pop the window. Well, it's because it hallucinated, right? It just said, I'm making up something. Well, in this case, it was real data because it read it from, but it hallucinated. That's dangerous. Well, think about that in terms of healthcare. It's one thing if it said, hey, you can get this, you should be able to get a refund on this ticket or that bag you purchased at the airline. But what about in healthcare? What if it says, oh, I think that you have cancer, so I'm going to just say you got cancer?
Yeah.
What happens one time, one hallucinate, you can have 10 different things that are signs and indicators of having cancer. But just the fact that it hallucinated and told you that one time can destroy a person's life. So do we need regulation to control that? Absolutely. If you don't, we run that risk. And I mean, I'm not going to say for better or because some will argue that you don't want to have as much regulation because you want to make progress. But I'm like, there's detriment there. So I'm a firm believer that we absolutely need more regulation around that.
Yeah. It's really interesting. I think like if you zoom out for a second and you think of kind of, let's say, the broader internet, the internet is a domain without a ton of regulation, but it definitely has some, right? So for instance, can you sell alcohol on the internet? Yes. Can you sell it to people under 21? No. Right? So there are levels of regulation. Same thing with, guns, firearms. There's any number of things where there is like the overall ability to have a capability, but then there are limits on that capability. And right now it feels very much like the Wild Wild West in a lot of the kind of AI use cases. And at best, to your point about hallucination, you have this kind of like tiny little disclaimer at the bottom of an AI response that says, answers may not be correct. Well, I think we've all been in technology long enough to know that A, nobody reads the fine print, and B, like there's a lot of kind of sampling bias. You try something once or twice, it looks good, it works out, you're like, okay, boom, let's go, right? And you just kind of implement it. With customers that you've been dealing with, how do you counsel them around like not moving too quickly?
So the easiest method there is to say, hey, what is the risk of the unknown? And what I mean by
Okay.
that is that we love to say AI is going to solve all of our problems. And I say you're giving the control of all of your data to a solution that can think faster than you. That's the goal of artificial intelligence, right? You want it
Right.
to do what you can do faster than you. And I say, well, you got to understand, since you can't keep up with it, you got to understand that once you give it that capability, it has it, and it's not going to stop. And so then they will in response think to themselves, well, what is the risk that I'm going to have from that decision? There's some things that you were like, hey, if it goes fast as can be without my control, let's go with filling orders for a delivery service.
Yeah.
Like, fill these orders, right? You're like, I can track my inventory. I can know I got this, so keep going. But think about this in terms of, I want to give people information about themselves. Whatever information I want to give out. I want to give out, you come get your bank information, social security, whatever it may be. Bank information, right? And say, hey, I want to get this information private. And it's like, hey, I'm thinking and I'm doing this at the speed of like way faster than you. And you can't monitor what I get out. So whenever a leak happens, it's going to flood. What if they started saying, hey, whenever somebody came in, they started thinking that the Johns were all the same, and it gave out different Johns information to you. It gave you different Johns, bank, different Johns, social security number, because you just thought you both were the same person, because you could have been John Johnson.
Hmm.
The fact that you can't stop it because it's going so fast, it's just a scary thing. So, I depends on the risk of the data that's going out. And once people start understand, people understand and connect with their own information. So yeah.
Yeah. And when you think about like guardrails, which you've brought up a couple of times, what have been or what are the key kind of guardrails that you're talking to people about putting in place right now? Is it on the what you're asking the AI side, or is it on the what you expect back from the AI side, or is it on the handling of the interaction, or all of the above, or how do you think about that right now?
The data and how you train it. So
Okay.
the biggest component to me is that the data that you give it and how you train it, and like I said, the hallucination level. How you train it. So the I guess you could look at it as human interaction in terms of training. Meaning, if it trains based off of real data and the interaction that it got back from a human being. Meaning, I said yes, I said no. So I said up, down, good, bad, needed, unneeded. And then it's learning from that, fine tuning from that. I'm not a proponent right now of the speculatory nature of AI, so I would say in those cases, speculatory information should go to a human being to make a decision. Meaning they will rationalize out whatever it is, meaning should this be considered real or not. So that's where I stick right now in terms of recommendations for AI.
Gotcha. And along those lines, where do you think the appetite with healthcare organizations is right now? Because I think, over the course of my career, healthcare, right or wrong, has gotten the reputation as being like maybe the most conservative organization, or maybe tied with government. Maybe those two are generally seen as being like the last adopters of new technologies. Where do you think, though, healthcare is with AI adoption today? Is it like very, very beginning? Is it, talking about it, haven't really started anything? Or is it like, hey, we've got production use cases coming like in the next 3 months?
So it's burning hot actually right now. We
Okay.
got a lot of traction going on there, because what is in terms of, so let's look at it clinically and operationally. Clinically, they're diagnosing breast cancer. They're tracking down, down to the cellular level. They're saying, hey, these capabilities allow us to look at large data sets and understand it in a lower amount of time. Good, and it's serving its purpose. Operationally, I can't say that same traction. I was actually just attending an event earlier on that topic, but I would say operationally they're going to be fine, because the speculatory nature again is what we talk about, the hallucination, where
Yeah.
if you give out healthcare information, that's dangerous. Like nobody.
Yeah.
Do you really want to get some information? Like, it's like going on to the internet saying, "Hey, is this medication good for me?" Right? Am I
Yeah.
am I coughing? If I have a cough and I have a fever, am I okay? You go on the internet, it's like, Heck, you can have this hay fever right here. You have this sickness. You're like,
Yeah.
I'm gonna die, but you really just got the common cold, right? So it's like, in terms of healthcare, it's really, clinically, I do see more traction. Operationally, in terms of giving out advice and information, I see them being more conservative in that realm right now.
Gotcha. And with along those lines, do you think that the organizations that you're working with, they're aware, they have a good understanding and awareness of the risks, or is it really the case that, as you get into these conversations with them, you're having to do kind of the same educational process every time?
So I say, I treat it this way. People are good at what they do, right? So what I like to do is I like to make them understand it from their own perspective. So it's I don't expect them to know, like you don't expect somebody who's focused on understanding your heart and your lungs to understand cybersecurity. But if you say, hey, this data that you get from there, where it
Hmm.
goes, how truthful it is. If you make them understand it in that perspective, then they catch it. So it's really just I make it relatable. So do they understand it? Yeah, you give it to them the way that they understand it.
Got it. That's really interesting. There's a question that I got here that I'd love to hear your thoughts on, kind of coming back to the ethics side of it and kind of navigating the complex interactions. And that question is like, okay, AI everywhere, but does AI know that there is AI everywhere? And what are some of those implications and how it might affect us in some of these use cases going forward?
Yeah, that's a really dangerous one because AI doesn't know. We don't right now we integrate AI whether we just slap it on top or we build it into the system. We're not telling the components or the other solutions that we're interacting with about our AI and how it's thinking. What happens if one AI is hallucinating crazy and it's the
Right?
entry source to another AI? The information that it will get, how will it know if it's reliable if you just told it, listen if it comes from that data source, right? And flip it around. What if I, flipped it and said, hey, the secondary source had AI and it was hallucinating crazy. And it said, hey, like early when I was talking about the driving with the car, the GTA, it
Yeah.
said, hey, you know what? You told me that you need to get a car. You can go take anybody's car that you want on the side of the road as long as no cop is
Yeah.
standing around
Yeah.
there. You'll be
Yeah.
good to
Yeah.
go. Woo,
Yeah.
that's dangerous, right? So
Yeah.
it's like because AI is becoming everywhere, we're not really building AI out to be aware of AI and to operate off of. Well, hey, you want to check to make sure that's an AI out there? We're saying
Yeah.
it's selfish. It's just you, like human beings.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think at the end of the day, to your point, I mean, one of the things that I saw recently that I thought was really compelling on the one hand, but I didn't really think about this kind of aspect of it was I saw a company that had built a multi-agent solution for a particular problem that they had. And they're a very large organization, tens of thousands of employees worldwide, and they've got all kinds of corporate complexity issues around, you can imagine an organization that size rather, they've always got questions around payroll, benefits, time off, leave, changes in employment status, somebody going from contractor to full-time employee, somebody going from single to married, and then the benefits that they might get, and, from, let's say, married to having a kid, and all of these things. And they found that, they were just having to spend so much time managing internal HR issues that they put together a solution that handles each of those different things: benefits, employment status, payroll, all those things around it. And they found that actually different AIs were better for different domains, right? One was much better for talking about benefits, one was much better for talking about accounting and payroll and tax, and another one around something else, which I don't really remember off the top of my head. So what they put together was this multi-agent solution where employees would ask one question like, hey, my wife and I are having a child. What do we need to do? And what they might actually need to do is actually go change their healthcare plan, change the number of dependents on their payroll taxes, withholding, and also, let's say, notify somebody and request time off for maternity leave or whatever it is, right? And that goes through an initial AI. And then that AI farms that question out to the specific topic AIs. And then the answers come back and it all gets synthesized into like one response to the employee. But to your point, none of those systems know that the question is coming from an AI at the beginning, or that the response is going back to an AI before it goes back to the employee. And so, one particular link in that chain that gets it wrong, there's no quality control process really. There's no kind of certainly no ethics check along the way. And this is, internal stuff. That this is maybe not something that's going into directly, let's say a medical diagnosis or whatnot. And probably the employee reading it would look at it and be like, well, that doesn't make sense. So if there is a complete, weird hallucination response, the stakes are lower. Plus, it's not directly impacting somebody's medical outcome or something like that. But low risk, but exactly to your point, there's no ethical consideration anywhere in that chain. So how would you recommend organizations to think about that differently, or to think about managing the fact that AI doesn't know it's interacting with another AI?
So that's the complex point, and I would say that's where we need to take technology to another level, and we need to be able, or at least look. You know what? Step back. Let's go classical and just say, hey, checkbox. You're talking to AI. If we just literally told it that, hey, be aware that if this AI does say anything outside the normal, that you got to accept that this may be a hallucination. How do you double check that? What would be the guardrails and method to that? I don't know the answer, but I would say at a basic level, at least let it know, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. The blind trust is if you right now trusted somebody and say, hey, whenever somebody says something to me, I'm gonna have a blindfold on and I'm gonna go in whatever direction they're going in. Tell me to go in. And you did it right now.
Yeah.
How easy is it for you to run into a wall if you don't know who's telling you that and what their intents are when they're telling you that? So again, you trust a human being. You trust them. You built organically that trust, but you got to have that same level of trust with the system, and that's comes from morals, right? I mean, it's at the end of the day, you trust the integrity of another human being. You got to trust the integrity of that AI.
Yeah, but to your point, I mean, maybe disclosure at the beginning when you think about it, and thinking about is it a blind trust, or is it a trust but verify? Is it trust with disclosure? I mean, that is a real question that I think organizations are going to have to navigate depending on the use case and depending on the implementation, and maybe the level of risk around what could go wrong if the answer really is completely off, right?
So yeah, I mean, and that's going to come from that UEBA side of the house, right? So I mean, that comes from, hey, we are tracking all the events, all the activity, because we got to find that unknown. So we got to say this is unusual. So we got to say that in that case it stood out, because the only way you can really go back and backtrack and verify is if you know what the normal is, right? Because when you go back and you look, you got to say this is how far outside the normal. How that's determined, I'm gonna have to leave that one up to the AI experts, but that would be my thoughts on that.
Got it. I want to change gears for a little bit, because there's a couple things in your experience and your background that I'd love to hear more about. You've spent some time in different parts of the U.S. from our, both of our homes based in the D.C. area. Also spent time, looks like you worked on some stuff with Kentucky, worked on some stuff in Hawaii. And I know you mentioned a couple other places, and as we were getting ready to record today's episode, I guess one question that I have for you is do you see big gaps in the level of technology adoption and sophistication in different parts of the country?
Oh, absolutely. I'll sum that up as saying the larger the city, I would say the higher the technology adoption.
Okay.
Smaller the city, smaller the state, the less. So
got it. Yeah. And do you find that across the different industries that you've interacted with? I know you spent a lot of time in healthcare, but in the time that you spent time outside of healthcare, do you see a big difference in the levels there?
Yes. So I'll say that the slowest is government.
Okay.
Government is the slowest, and that's just because, in my opinion, it's because of regulation, right?
Yeah.
Really, they want to test everything. So, the strict regulations there. So government is a slow adopter. I will say that retail, manufacturing, they are blazing the way. Finances, getting up there. Uh, yeah, healthcare is, again, like I said, clinically making leaps and bounds. Operationally, not as fast.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And what did you learn testing Tetris?
So I will say I love the game and I
Okay.
love competing against my fellow testers. However, it's a whole different story when you have to complete a certain move or a certain sequence a certain amount of times in a certain time frame because that's a part of your job requirements. You start to look at testers differently. You're like, is this fun or am I working? I have to achieve this goal. So every time you don't get it, you're
Yeah.
like, crap, I gotta redo it. So
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
we always had fun at the end of the day because we would always get on there and play and have fun and just compete against each other. But it got tough at times when you were
Yeah.
forced to play on high levels and achieve tasks. As
Yeah.
good as you think.
After that, well, two questions. First, do you still play Tetris, or was it like so much overload that you're like, nope, done with that game?
Right now, my wife and I, Dr. Mario. So
Okay,
although we play Tetris, we have a Nintendo emulator, and we play Dr. Mario every night. So Dr. Mario.
there you go. It's so funny, man. I don't know that I have found any more enjoyable games. There are games that are arguably like the level of art, the level of, let's say, graphics and physics engine and everything is like off the charts, amazing. They are without a doubt better technical achievements than some of these early Nintendo games, but I don't know that they're more fun. For me, Super Mario 64 and I can't remember exactly which Super Mario Brothers on Wii. I think it was like New Super Mario Bros. on the Nintendo
I
Wii.
didn't play that one.
Those two are like the
I played the
most fun.
64.
Yeah. Is there a better game than Super Mario 64?
So
Like, I'm not
here's what I'll
sure.
say. This past weekend, my wife and I played Super Mario 1. So let's just put
Okay.
that out there. Then from there, I will say that I do play. So it depends on game style. Like I would say, when I was younger, I played the World of Warcraft. I'm like, I was addicted to it, and
Yeah.
try to play with my son.
Yeah.
Not as fun. Right now, I do play some games like, so my wife and I, we like playing co-op games. So we play games like
Yep. Yep.
Moving Out and Overcooked, where you're just doing the same task over and over again, like you're moving people's furniture or you're cooking food. So it's
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Can
I'm with
can
you
I
on.
say it's the best games? No, I just
Yeah. But this is my point. Like, I think co-op games, fun, fun for the sake of fun is I think,
yeah.
my vibe as well. But I was going to ask on the Tetris side, are you better than everybody else that you know at Tetris?
Yeah, I mean, what kind of? I mean, we were friends to this point. Now you're questioning me. What you trying to say? I mean, let's keep this formal and nice, okay? Let's keep it
Awesome. Sorry. I don't know that I've laughed this hard on modern cyber before now. I appreciate that, Kelvin. Hey, Kelvin, just to wrap up today's conversation, first, sorry, thanks again for taking the time. I've really enjoyed today's conversation. Are there any closing thoughts that you'd like to leave us with, whether it's around AI, whether it's around some of your other experiences, and any links you'd like to share with the audience?
Yeah, so four things. One, when you're dealing with AI, think about your information sources. I know this may go for a corporate perspective, but think about it from your home computer. Just think about it if you had a shared computer with your family. Would you really want your son or your daughter to see your profile? Come on now. Well, you might not want AI to see that data. Two, you want to make sure where your data is going. If you're using a SaaS cloud, where's your information going? You're telling it everything about you and how you think. Where is it going? So always check to see where it's going. And three, check the default hallucination levels. You want to make sure that your AI is the same as you are.
Awesome. And for anybody who's looking to learn more about yourself, your own organization, what's the best place for them to look?
CyberSecAndI.com, or you can go to CSAI.pro, same website. Yep.
All right. Well, Kelvin Green, thank you so much for taking the time to join us on this episode of Modern Cyber, where we talked about AI, and I inadvertently somehow questioned Kelvin's Tetris skills with no offense intended, and I will definitely back away from that. It's really funny. I've never been good at Tetris at all. I'm terrible at Tetris. But it is always consistently rated one of the top 2 most addictive games of all time. It's Tetris and Civilization. Civilization is a game that I had to give up and walk away from. And I'm sure there are other people in the audience who are nodding their heads right now about either one of those games. But Kelvin, thanks again for taking the time to join us on Modern Cyber. To our audience, you know what to do. Rate, review, share with a friend. If you'd like to come on the podcast, or if you know somebody who should come on, please do reach out to us, just podcast@firetail.io. Otherwise, we'll have links in the show notes to CyberSec and I, and we will talk to you next time on the next episode of Modern Cyber. Bye-bye.
Thanks.